and we'll be beginning very shortly. Please be reminded that this session is going to be live streamed. So beginning very shortly. Please be reminded that this session is going to be live streamed. Yes, that's a thing too. There's going to be obviously a lag.
At the University of Trinidad and Tobago, there is a duty of care to the guests, students, and staff in maintaining a safe, smoke-free campus environment. In this regard, there are a few announcements aimed at ensuring your safety at this facility. Please be guided by the following. The UTT Chaguanas Campus Agora is equipped with an electronic fire detection and alarm system.
Keelan Alexis. Keelan Alexis. Thank you, Keelan. Professor Adel Elgamal, Assistant Vice President, Research, Impact, and Postgraduate Studies at the University of Trinidad and Tobago. Our two VIP guests, Professor Barbara Lala and Professor Valerie Youssef. Dr. Iris Hewitt Bradshaw, Associate Professor at the CEP and UTT.
TT. It's with great pride and joy that I welcome you all to the official launch of Caribbean Discourses, Stylistic and Critical Discourse, Approaches to Language Use in the Caribbean. This book is a groundbreaking exploration of the rich and diverse language. Stylistic and Critical Discourse, Approaches to Language Use in the Caribbean. This book is a groundbreaking exploration of the rich of the linguistic diversity that enriches our lives. Thank you for being a part of this special occasion. Enjoy the launch and let us continue to support and celebrate the academic achievements that connect and uplift our Caribbean community. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor El-Gamal. Co-editor Ryan Durgesing is a research fellow at the Ruhr University at Bochum and PhD candidate at the University of Münster in Germany, where his work focuses on morphosyntactic variation in the Caribbean Englishes. His research interests include stylistics, critical discourse studies, variationist sociolinguistics, and corpus-based approaches to linguistic analysis. His MPhil thesis, undertaken at the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine, was a stylistic comparative analysis of Ernest Hemingway's and V.S. Naipaul's protagonists and narrators. Ladies and gentlemen, joining us virtually to share his opening remarks, Ryan Durgesing.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gugaya, and good afternoon again to all of our guests. In choosing what to talk about in these short opening remarks, I had to decide on a through line of balance. What would be interesting to tell you, an audience already gathered at a book launch, about the book? Should I focus on the personal and interpersonal journeys that brought Nisha and I together to run the early conference, or should I focus on the academic issues of methodologies and theory that entail compiling a cohesive book? Then, what to talk about hit me on the cover of the book itself, because in the beginning, there was always a title. I think the idea for the book's title came even before the ideas for our conference on stylistics, critical discourse analysis, and language use in the Caribbean were even beginning to form. Though that conference title was apt, it was a mouthful. It might not have sit well on a cover.
Hi, Ryan, are you able to hear us?
I am, yeah.
Yes, I think, could you just pause a bit? We need to
Sure.
sort something out, yeah.
Sure. Though that conference title was apt, it was a mouthful. It might not have sit well on
Hi,
the
Ryan,
cover.
are you able to hear us?
I am, yeah.
Yeah, I think, could you just pause a minute? We need to
Sure.
put something on, yeah.
Sure. All right. Can you hear me, or is everything okay now? I think I should continue. So I will, and if anyone tells me not to, then I can stop.
Oh, okay, you can go ahead. We were just getting a sort of a lag.
Right.
So
You've gone muted now. I don't hear you, Dirk. I think I should continue. So I will, and if anyone tells me not to, then I can stop.
yeah, what's happening is that yeah, we have like a sort of a 20-second delay.
Mhm.
So we're gonna try to see if we can resolve it before we continue, because we are hearing what you're saying, and then we are hearing what you're saying again 20 seconds later, as though you know.
All right. Well, then you
I
just
want
tell
to
me
see
when.
if the technicians can sort it out first before we proceed, okay?
Sure.
And please bear with us, ladies and gentlemen. We just have to sort out this technical difficulty. Thank you.
All right. Well, then you just tell
Want
me
to see
when.
if the technicians can sort it out first before we proceed, okay?
Sure.
Please bear with us, ladies and gentlemen. We just have to sort out this technical. Thank you.
All right. I think I've been given the go ahead or the continue part, so I'm going to try to. And if anything happens, please someone stop me, and we will see how it goes. All right. Good. So. I began by saying that I kind of struggled a little bit about what to tell you in these opening remarks. And I was looking at the book, and it came to me that really a lot of what I needed to say or wanted to say would come from discussing the title. Because the conference itself would have focused on many, many things that had a very long title itself, it might not have sit well on a cover, and it might not have offered some subtlety and mystery that would hopefully capture readers' interest. Caribbean Discourses summed up the range of what Nisha and I envisioned for this project because it immediately rooted. Okay, I've been asked to stop again. I will be back. Keep that with you.
Hey Ryan, is there an echo on your side?
No, I don't think there's an echo for me.
How about now? Is there an echo on your side?
Nope.
Taking inputs. We kind of favor of let them go ahead because they have to. Getting correct on wrong, pretty bad, so that we can use that to solve it. Yeah, I'll probably go and bring it upstairs if you like.
So are we taking buses right now?
Yeah, you know how much it is.
Go ahead and continue. We're gonna swap the mic over here.
All right, I think hopefully that might be sorted. But again, anyone can tell me to stop again if they'd like. Good. So I think I'm going to try to go back a little bit in order to continue. So I was saying that the idea for the book's title came even before the ideas for our conference on stylistics, critical discourse analysis, and language use in the Caribbean were even beginning to form. Though that conference title was apt, and as I said, it was a mouthful, it might not have sit well on a book cover. It might not have offered some subtlety and mystery that would hopefully capture readers' interest. Caribbean Discourses summed up the range of what Nisha and I envisioned for this project because it immediately rooted the book in place. Discourse, as we use it in linguistics, is about language practices and language use in a particular context. The thrust was always to analyze kinds of texts, media, educational policy documents, literary works, social media comments, by understanding how they operated within the unique language practices of the Caribbean. That then explains the discourses of the title, but by far the more important part, and much less easy to define, is the Caribbean. Intuitively, those of us from the region feel cultural kinship. We have shared histories of tragedies and triumphs and everything in between. But in our scholarship, the work to describe the Caribbean as a separate and inwardly defined space continues. For most of our recorded history, what it means to be Caribbean has often been done to or for us, and from those with no particular interest in this space or its people. Now, with the maturation of our own scholarships and academies in the region, not to mention our own universities, however, Caribbean thinking done by those with real understanding and investment in the region is now well placed to move us forward. Our hope for this book is that it can add to the body of work that has been done and is ongoing by Caribbean-focused academics and practitioners of our discourses so that we can better define ourselves for ourselves. Finally, and speaking of the work that has been done, Discourse, and the Caribbean, I will share one small personal part of the journey after all. Nisha and I, and most of our colleagues who join us in this collection, stand on the shoulders of the Caribbeanist academics who have come before us. The book itself is dedicated to two such academics, Professor Barbara Lala and Professor Valerie Youssef, whose teaching and mentorship has gone on to impact generations of scholars in discourse analysis in our context, and whose insights have informed so much of our own work and thinking. It is fitting that this book launch, like the book itself, should open with our endless thanks to them. And thank all of you, our audience members as well. I now turn over, finally, to our MC.
And of course, we appreciate your patience in our situation here. So we have come to what I consider the exciting part of today's event, which is to get some excerpts from this wonderful piece of work. And the first reading, sound like from church, huh? The first reading is going to be done by our reader, Angeline Mohan Ragbir, who is a PhD candidate at the Center for Education Programs here at UTT. Her undergraduate and postgraduate studies have been in linguistics, literature, and education. She's going to read an excerpt from chapter 10, Storifying Caribbean Cricket, Voice and Perspective in Paul Keynes Douglas's Tanti at the Oval. Please let us welcome now Angeline.
Good afternoon. The topics of Paul Keynes Douglas's stories, poems, and plays are contextualized by and cover every imaginable aspect of life in Trinidad and Tobago, as well as in Grenada, where he spent his formative years. Keynes Douglas's interest principle is therefore wide-ranging. Serious topics are spliced with humor to engage and sustain listeners' and readers' attention, and to satirize our failings and foibles, as well as the narrator's own, at the levels of the individual, community, and government. According to Norwick, narrative jokes are a common genre of conversational joke-telling, and within various stories by Keynes Douglas, which generally tend to have a conversational style, there are narrative jokes which conform to the typical structural elements of the build-up, the punchline, and the pivot. However, in his writings, Keynes Douglas tends to frame and perspectivize, even altering and lengthening the basic build-up, pivot, and punchline structure of these narrative jokes with evaluative and modal elements. And if the narrative is not open-ended, he includes a coda. This is especially so when the underlying intent or subtext of the narrative joke involves a serious message. Thus, whereas on the surface, or with a superficial reading, it may seem erroneously that an entire story is a joke or a series of jokes, especially because it may induce repeated periods of laughter from the listener and reader, one may make a distinction by splitting hairs and saying that it is a jokey story, rather than it is simply a joke that is in story form. One orientative element of Tanti at the Oval is the narrator's declaration about the eponymous character, which includes why he was made to take her to the cricket match between the combined islands and Trinidad and Tobago at the Oval. The reason foregrounded by the use of rhetorical anaphora. I know it's she birthday. I know she from St. Vincent. I know she always talking about the islands. The narratee addressee, the textual construct to whom he recounts the story, is his wife. Woman, you don't know what confusion you put me in, eh? Woman, you don't know how you nearly lose a husband, eh? This time, his annoyance emphasized by the use of simplicity, but the reader is also drawn in as a listener due to the immediacy effected by both the first and second person voicing and perspectivization of the account. Since it is solely the narrator's voice we hear in this story, his account of what Tantimul says typically includes reported speech, direct speech, and free direct speech. Some selected samples of these are respectively her vitriol against the match umpire. She says how he thiefing for Trinidad. She says how he lucky she out there. Her affinity for and partiality towards the combined islands team and certainty of their victory. Here she. That's my boys and them. They go bust all your tail. She said they thief. She said they air like the islands. These examples of speech representation in the story highlight Tantimul's ideological or attitudinal perspective. That is, in terms of modality and language, they are categorical assertions, positively shaded epistemic expressions which demonstrate the confidence in her opinions about what she perceives as the lack of integrity of the cricket officials, the biased fans of the opposing team which she dislikes and is assured will lose, and therefore her strong belief in the outcome of the cricket match, which will go in her preferred team's favor. These selections in the story include the use of language, Creole usage, humor, and cricket commentary, and Keynes Douglas's decision to incorporate pictorial illustrations as visual language is also important. While the reader is aware of what the narrator as focalizer sees, hears, thinks, feels, and does, allowing for certain details to be backgrounded and foregrounded, in this first-person narration, the worldview of especially Tantimul and also the crowd as it relates to regional cricket is nonetheless given central focus via the recounting of their actions and words. The impact of Keynes Douglas's fictional representation of the competitive spirit and insularity which exists in the world of Caribbean cricket is due in part to Tantan at the Oval being based on actual cricketers and an actual cricket match which took place in the real world outside of the text, the popularity of his Tantimul character, and his storytelling. Tantimul and other spectators at the Oval are metonyms for not just the rivalries expected and reflected in sport, but also for the cricket lovers throughout the Caribbean region, for whom this sport is deeply linked with historical, social, political, and cultural meanings. The ways in which this is storified through voice and perspective, such as techniques of speech representation, speech acts, modality, transitivity, etc., lend to the success and enduring appeal of Tanti at the Oval. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we will now listen to a review of Caribbean Discourses by Dr. Iris Hewitt Bradshaw. Dr. Iris Hewitt Bradshaw is an associate professor, teacher educator, and discipline leader at the Center for Education Programs at the University of Trinidad and Tobago, where she teaches courses in language, linguistics, and literature, and practicum. Prior to her service at the UTT, she taught at Corinth Teachers College, San Fernando, Trinidad. She completed a BA in language, literature, and linguistics, a certificate in international relations, and an MPhil and a PhD in language education at the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine. She also holds a postgraduate certificate in teaching and higher education from Anglia Ruskin University, UK. Dr. Bradshaw has published articles and book chapters on curriculum, linguistics, language education, pedagogy, and leadership in education. She has presented extensively at conferences locally and internationally, holds membership in many professional organizations and and serves as a peer reviewer for several academic journals and educational organizations. Please welcome to the podium one of my favorite people, Dr. Hewitt Bradshaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the love.
Ladies and gentlemen, by now you are aware that the text we formally launched today is a culmination of a process that began with a successful online conference. That conference was on stylistics and critical discourse analysis. After many revisions, thank you. After many revisions, drafts, and iterations, we are thankfully at a stage where we can celebrate the scholarship of the researchers, the diligence of the editors, and the competence of all those who were responsible for the publication of Caribbean Discourses, Stylistic and Critical Discourse Approaches to Language Use in the Caribbean, edited by Ryan Durgason and Nisha Salvon Ramkisoon, published by Palgrave Macmillan, and dedicated to two eminent professors in the field, Professor Lala and Professor Yusuf. After the hard work to produce the text, the volume, I get the easier task of reviewing it. And I'm grateful for two main reasons. Apart from the fact that I learned so much from the chapters, the discussions took me back to my undergraduate days when my friends thought I was strange because I willingly selected to pursue courses titled Phonology, Morphology, Syntax, or Sociolinguistics. And when you followed those up with courses like Applied Linguistics and Caribbean Dialectology, then you were really weird, right? To borrow an increasingly popular phrase from American politics. For me, this text validates the usefulness of the field and the subfields of linguistics, not only to language learning and teaching, but also the appreciation of literary texts and to people's understanding of how their language connects to their identity, their history, and to the world. Additionally, it helps us to understand how language relates to power, ideology, and agency, especially so in post-colonial contexts like the Caribbean is. We can perhaps begin a closer exploration of the contents of the book with the editor's summary, statement of justification, and purpose found in chapter 1 of the introduction. And they state, we aim here not to trivialize these incredible important aspects of social and linguistic study, but rather to offer a complementary and complexifying take on understanding aspects of language use, while concurrently highlighting how critical discourse studies, CDS approaches, can be usefully applied in this context. Now, if we use a reader response, think aloud strategy, we can do a quick analysis of the statement to guide our expectation of the chapters that follow. Key phrases in the statement: 1, these incredibly important aspects of social and linguistic study, and that's an anaphoric reference to previously mentioned strands. A, discourse analysis of literary text, and B, Creole linguistics. The second phrase, complementary, suggests that the contents of the book would complement the strands mentioned. Their promise that the book gives a complexifying take raises the anticipation that the content makes the familiar strange or more complex, thereby throwing new light or perspectives on previously researched issues. What exactly is made complex and how? And fourthly, highlighting how CDS approaches can be usefully applied in this context, promises that the contributions in the volume offer diverse applications of critical studies that probe Caribbean contexts to reveal contestations of power, ideology, and/or agency. And we can keep these aspects in mind as we explore the volume on Caribbean discourses. The book itself is logically structured in 5 sections, apart from the introduction. The number of sections in a volume of 12 chapters is perhaps unusual, but given the genesis of the compilation, it's understandable if the strands relate to the original submissions for the conference. On reading the content of each section, the rationale for the categorization becomes clearer. The introductory chapter fittingly gives an account of the historical, political, social, and linguistic context from which the volume emerges. There's early acknowledgement of the European origins of CDA, and a justification is made for its use in a post-colonial Caribbean context. And this is given CDA's focus on critiquing power, ideology, and agency. In part 1, tracing the development of discourses in the Caribbean, the 2 chapters by Migger and Mulisin examine the historical context of Caribbean discourses. These chapters contribute to the discussion of diachronic changes in discursive styles and the uniqueness of language processes in Creole-speaking speech communities, where adaptation is made to the communicative styles depending on pragmatic considerations and considerations of identity. Migger focuses on the Eastern Maroons in Suriname and French Guiana with data drawn from participant observation and audio recordings. Melissen's data are drawn from various genres: recipes, phone, radio phone-in programs, and digital interactive text format from the internet in Trinidad. Both researchers demonstrate how language processes have their own dynamics and how these are shaped by the speakers over time to serve specific communicative functions. Part 2 of the text is titled Discourse and Public Policy in the Caribbean. This section has 1 chapter by Selvon Ramkissoon that offers a critical reading of policy documents. And these documents relate to curriculum development in the Trinidad and Tobago education landscape, specifically the secondary school sector. Selvon Ramkissoon uses CDA, Fairclough's transtextuality model as frames to analyze the secondary school language arts curriculum. Her analysis reveals that although successive drafts reflected more informed positions on issues such as the role of Creoles in education, areas related to the philosophical underpinnings of curriculum, the content of curriculum, and inclusive practices still need further development. An important conclusion that can be drawn from this chapter is that there is a need for greater effort to have appropriate language education policies, not just in Trinidad and Tobago, but in the Caribbean region. In fact, to date, few language policies are in place in the Caribbean. And this is an area that offers opportunities for further research. Part 3 brings together critical inquiry in the sphere of politics under the title Discursive Construction of the Caribbean Prime Minister. And the contributions here use an interesting range of texts. Sanderson Cole's study of Dr. Eric Williams uses autobiographical text. Shepard draws his data from newspaper texts, specifically editorials on Patrick Manning, a former Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. Data in Walter's chapter come from social media comments on Andrew Holness, the Prime Minister of Jamaica. Though all three researchers adopt critical perspectives, their approaches are different. Sanderson Cole combines Lakoff and Johnson's conceptual metaphor with leadership theory to deconstruct the way events are selected and presented in Inward Hunger. Shepard uses Fairclough's model of discourse to examine the ways in which power works in media discourse, while Walters grounds her analysis of social media political discourse in Waddock's Discourse Historical Approach, DHA, to illustrate how users give and retract power from leaders in the Caribbean. All three researchers contrast their analyses with previous non-CDA approaches in the study of their selected phenomena. And as a consequence, they make a case for the distinctive nature of the research in this volume. Part 4 directs our attention to stylistic appraisals of Caribbean literary discourse, and we had an example read just before I came up. The three chapters here are complementary to the previous studies in literary discourse analysis. Durgasin's chapter draws on a psychological perspective, and elements of literary analysis. He gives us a complex analysis of the ways in which stylistic features of Naipaul's House for Mr. Biswas combine to the discursive construction of the tragic. Not in the way that tragedy is traditionally defined, but descriptive of the circumstances of the anti-Cameo hero who is in a state of quote unquote ontological homelessness. The discussion invites another reading of A House for Mr. Biswas from the perspective of the use of narrative techniques, which render a character's struggle to cope with the psychological cost of their personal and social circumstances. For me, this chapter particularly helped the editor's promise to complexify. Given what I always remember as what I call a Wilson Harris moment. In my undergraduate years, we were all excited as students to attend a guest lecture by Wilson Harris. But at the end, Professor Ramchan could tell that we did not totally get it. And he advised us, don't worry, in a few years from now, you will remember this day and say, oh, that is what Harris meant. Ryan's chapter was not that. We won't take years to understand it, But fortunately, it's written prose, so we could flip back and connect. Harris was oral, so we couldn't ask him to stop and repeat. So Ryan's chapter draws on many concepts from different schools of thought: psychology, philosophy, literary and linguistic theory, and it requires disciplined reading to make the connections that his analysis invites the reader to make. However, at the end, and certainly not years after, you get the logic of his argument. Ma Chamberlain's chapter follows, in which she seeks to elucidate how the expression of perspective in language relates to the struggle for identity. To do this, she uses Salvon's An Island is a World, in which the author explored the impact of a writer's awareness of language variation and its social and artistic significance of the creative process, on the creative process. There's comparatively greater focus on grammatical forms, pronouns, verbs, adverbs in this analysis of the narrator's and character's language use to make connections among different elements of discourse presentation. In the last chapter of this section, Skeet analyzes voice and perspective in one of the most popular texts from performance poet and storyteller Paul Keynes Douglas. Skeet's close examination of Tantia the Oval illustrates how different elements of the discourse, namely orality and narrative representations, contribute to the authenticity of Creole voice, to reader engagement and comedic episodes, as well as characterization. An interesting feature of all three chapters in this section is their deep focus on the how of the text that they select as units of analysis. The researchers offer new insights into the creation of textual discourse. And when we return to those texts, the analyses in this section invite us to read them in new ways from different perspectives. In the final section of the volume, part 5, the focus is on gender, media, and discourse in the Caribbean. 2 chapters connect on the important public health issue of gender-based violence, and both demonstrate the usefulness of the CDS in real-life contexts. The first, by Esposito, Salvon Ramkisoon, and Durgasin, provide us with a critical exploration of digital discourses on gender-based violence, using comments on news coverage of the deaths of 3 female victims in Trinidad and Tobago. Data came from the comment sections of the Facebook profiles of 3 main newspapers and were analyzed using social media critical discourse studies. This is a transdisciplinary discursive approach that incorporates the nature and context of digitally mediated meaning making, and the research aims of CDS as well. Their findings highlighted a lamentable lack of systemic understanding of gender-based violence. Additionally, they highlighted the low expectation of institutional redress. The second chapter is Steele's chapter, which also addressed gender-based violence through a multimodal case study of media representation to reveal how media representations of conflict management are presented across print and broadcast news. Based on his investigation, he identifies and describes 4 sets of resources for recreating interpretations, changing roles, and transforming gender-based violence and its associated conflict management and mediation. Altogether, this edited collection offers different approaches in critical discourse studies to analyze language use in Caribbean societies in various spheres, the political, in history, literature, linguistics, sociology. By the end of the volume, the editor's claims made in the introduction that the text complements, complexifies, and highlights how CDS approaches can be usefully applied in the Caribbean context are sustained. I think the text benefits from the diversity of the contributors inside and outside of the Caribbean, because they bring a wealth of expertise and experiences to the analyses. They use different strands of CDA, different perspectives. They incorporate the seminal as well as the new. The result is original research that provides both experienced and novice researchers in the field with material to either drive their research agendas, to initiate new work in the field, or simply to admire and enjoy. Students in the field of linguistics, language communication would also find the work relevant and interesting to their course of study. In acknowledgement of the hard work that brought this body of research to the academic landscape, on behalf of everyone, I wish to thank and congratulate all the contributors and the editors who also double as contributors as we look forward to volume 2. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Before we continue, I'd like to acknowledge, excuse me, and welcome Professor Imber from the UTT's Board of Governors. Welcome, sir. Thank you. Right, let's move on to our second reading. This is going to be an excerpt from chapter 7, entitled The Most Honorable Brogard, a critical discourse analysis of Jamaica's Prime Minister as hero, sex symbol, and villain on social media. Written by Kadian Walters. Our reader is going to be Shomari Hector, a PhD candidate at the Center for Education Programs, UTT. In 2017, he won the Tobago House of Assembly elections as a representative from Bethel, Mount Irvin, the youngest elected member of that administration. He remains active in Tobago politics. So let's now welcome Shomari.
Thank you. Becoming the most honorable Brogard. The term Brogard originates from a song by the same name, written by Adrian Bailey and Christopher David Wright, and performed by a young Jamaican artist known as Daddy One. The popular song is essentially about celebrating a very well-respected male friend who is like family and an expression of loyalty. Holness gained the nickname Brogard by accepting a challenge on Twitter Jamaica. A young voter challenged Holness to change his name to the Most Honorable Brogard for 24 hours. On October 25th, 2019, the Prime Minister changed his name to the Most Honorable Brogard, only for a few minutes, causing Twitter to alight with fervency as users reacted with excitement to the temporary change. By granting this request, Holness continued to win the hearts of young Jamaicans, and the name soon replaced the builder title he gave himself. Let's examine Holness as hero. Of interest here are the names and titles the commenters used to refer to Holness on social media. Some discursive strategies identified, which include the use of his government names and nicknames with reference to him as their prime minister, servant, leader, and 21st century leader. Some commenters referred to him by his proper name, Holness, seen as a form of respect, while the use of Andrews signaled a sense of familiarity and friendliness. This is indicative of the view that he was a relatable leader who could connect with people. Others used the moniker Brogard, indicating solidarity and honor. This suggests that the commenters were proud of having Holness as their leader. From these comments, it appears that commenters claimed ownership of the Prime Minister, indicating that they were satisfied with his overall performance. For those with the abbreviated term PM, such as cool PM, such shortened text and the use of the word cool is stereotypically associated with youth. As discussed above, such open declaration for a party and its leader was discouraged as explored in the discussion on political talks in the previous sections. Due to the possibility of anonymity, social media offers increased freedom for political talk. Members of the electorate can now express their affinity for the leader of their choice. Here, the followers are ratifying Holness's identity as a competent leader, signaling that they approve of his performance and are proud to have him as their prime minister. Holness as sex symbol. We have seen where Holness was celebrated as hero, praised for his performance and governance. Female commenters also celebrated his appearance, particularly his physical attributes. In praising the Prime Minister's physique, women compared him to the past and present opposition leaders. This was heightened when Juliet Holness made a comment celebrating her husband, the then 47-year-old, leading up to the 2020 general election. We're lucky we have a young minister. We have a prime minister who body tight and firm, a prime minister who's sexy, done. We have a prime minister who could run for the whole day and probably with just about 3 to 4 hours of sleep. Me say, him not sleepy, none at all. It's straight walk. This statement, of course, was politically motivated, as she subtly stated that the leader of the opposition, Peter Phillips, who was at the time 72 years old, was incompetent to perform effectively. In previous parliamentary sittings, he had been captured on camera sleeping and gained the nickname Sleepy in some quarters. Though some were offended and called Mrs. Holness classless, others joined her in celebrating the Prime Minister as a sex symbol. Holness as villain, from Brogard to Bro Hug and Bro Dog. Commenters use several titles and names to refer to Holness when expressing disappointment in his performance. These include Andrew, Bro Hug, Bro Dag, Holy Mess, Demolition Man, Dictator, Hun, Drew, and Hitler. These are in stark contrast to the nomination discursive strategies examined earlier. As indicated above, face work is an essential aspect of political discourse and can make or break the representative's public identity. The act of calling the Prime Minister outside of his given title most honorable and the affectionate term brogard is face-threatening. Commenters reduce social distance between Holness and themselves by calling him Andrew. In so doing, we see where they equated themselves with the Prime Minister and referred to him on a first-name basis. This signaled that they were of the view that he no longer deserved their respect and admiration. Comments with the Prime Minister being addressed as Andrew were usually negative, signaling their disapproval of his performance. The nature of these comments suggests that these were former supporters who were now disgruntled. Though others had maintained the Prime Minister's first name in its English orthography, the comments maintained its negative nature. You, PM Andrew, you're too lie. You have let your people down, Andrews, and history will stick that on you. Andrew, you should think about that before, you know. Andrew, you're lying about corruption, crime, and corona. You is a wicked man, you, Andrew. We find some social critique embedded in these comments, and as a result, he was labeled as a villain. Commenters would often disregard his uncontested popularity and speak of Holness's performance. The use of his first name also signals social distancing as they refrain from using the formerly affectionate term Brogard. In conclusion, the application of the DHE approach to analysis has provided the perspective of those in power by focusing on the articulate minority. It has become a driving force in the Jamaican political landscape, and any political campaign should incorporate this loud minority as part of their target group. Through social critique, the people give and take power away from public figures and politicians. They create and perpetuate an image of the individual congruent to their perceptions of his or her performance in public office. This power is not to be ignored during political campaigns. Voter power is exercised through social media political discourse. This analysis offers a novel approach to examining DHA, not from the viewpoint of system or authority, but from the voice of the people and their own critique of the system. The language of the people is a tool of power used to signal voter intention. No longer can politicians have confidence in and rely on voter loyalty. Instead, they now have to pay attention to the voice of the people on social media, where the electorate highlights performance and policies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shomari. We now have our feature address. Eleonora Esposito is a researcher at the Institute for Culture and Society of the University of Navarra in Spain, and a seconded national expert to the Directorate General for Communications Networks, Content and Technology of the European Commissions. A Marie Sklodowska-Curie alumna, 2019-2021, Eleonora has been investigating complex intersections between language, identity, and the digitalized society in a number of global contexts, encompassing the EU, the Anglophone Caribbean, and the Middle East. I now invite Eleonora to deliver the feature address for today's launch.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me all right? Yeah? Okay, I guess so. Well, good morning, everyone. Well, first of all, I would like to thank Nisha and Brian for their kind invitation and also congratulate them on the organization of this book launch. I think it's a much anticipated book that really adds new dimensions to Caribbean scholarship in linguistics and social science, and it really adds value to the field. Value is also a key term of my talk, and I will come back to the concept of value later in the presentation. But as for now, I would like to start from another key word of my title, and the word is discourses. I hope you can see my screen in my presentation. Can anybody give me a thumb up? Yes, great, thank you. So discourses, why do we refer to discourses in plural? Not only because there are many definitions of discourses, there are linguists, philosophers, critical theorists, literary theorists, social scientists, but because at the heart of the concept of discourse lies the concept of multivocality, the presence of multiple voices, perspectives, interpretation within any given communicative context. Plurality is inherent in the nature of discourse, shaped as it is by its historical and situational context, drawing from different sources of knowledge and power, and thus can never be understood as a singular unified identity. So referring to discourses in the plural acknowledges the complexity and richness of interaction in the Caribbean context, recognizing the dynamic and contested nature of meaning-making processes in the Caribbean society, and in all societies actually, as discourses are continuously evolving and intersecting. When delimiting the scope of Caribbean discourses, of course, the interest of scholars has been largely directed towards literary expression. This is because, first of all, literature from the Caribbean is exceptional, both in content and forms of expression. The tales of survival, exile, resistance, endurance, and emigration make for a body of work that is essential for the study of the Caribbean and its diasporas, and I would say central for our understanding of the world today. Literary discourse has been, and to some extent still is, the main space for the exploration of some themes and topics that include the critique of colonial power dynamics and their lingering effects on Caribbean society, the intersection of race, class, and power in shaping social dynamics, gender roles and the impact of patriarchy in the Caribbean, issues on environmental degradation and the relationship between people and nature, and then, of course, the themes of displacement, belonging, the transnational Caribbean diaspora, just to name a few. I would like just to add a quick note that these themes, of course, are also explored to different extents beyond the literary in the plethora of music genres and dances from the Caribbean and practices and performances like Carnival, for example. These cultural and artistic expressions represent a crucial object of study as they represent the site of production of knowledge and culture otherwise, capturing the Caribbean's multivocality in a way that only art probably excels at doing. There is yet another important dimension to Caribbean discourses worth mentioning that has to do with the challenging world of language choices that are characteristics of the multicultural and multilingual Caribbean. So a Caribbean linguistic discourse has developed in the post-colonial Caribbean, associated, of course, with linguistics, with language acquisition, with sociolinguistics, and of course, with a strong focus on Creoles and the pidgin languages from which Creoles developed. It has been providing revealing insights into language evolution, acquisition, and use. And for its very nature, it does not just limit itself to the more formal aspects of syntax, morphology, semantics, and phonology, but delves into dimensions of language rights, because these intersect with issues of social justice in the Caribbean, especially given the initial marginalized status of Creole languages in the post-colonial setting throughout the region. So these themes include the politics of identity, self-representation, and nationalism, and the implication of code switching for identity in post-colonial societies, the long-standing interplay between oral and written culture, the rich communication of power effects enabled by code switching, and the difficulties of acknowledging or teaching these ranges in traditional education systems inherited by colonial power. Challenges that still persist almost 15 years after the 2011 Charter on Language Rights in the Creole-speaking Caribbean, especially in the areas of language advocacy, linguistic discrimination, and communicative hurdles in formal contexts, such as a courtroom. In the meantime, starting from the late 60s and 70s, a variety of approaches to a cross-discipline of discourse studies began to develop. Semiotics, psycholinguistics, sociolinguistics, and pragmatics are very much related and somehow concurrent to discourse studies. So we start referring to discourses as a way of speaking or writing about a particular topics, encompassing the use of language, style, and structure to convey meaning and serving as a medium of communication and interaction among individuals. 1970s, in my opinion, is kind of a landmark. Michel Foucault delivers his inaugural lecture at the College of France entitled The Order of Discourse. Foucault presents the hypothesis that in every society, the production of discourses is controlled by means of a number of external and internal procedures with three main aims: exercising its powers and dangers, reducing the force of uncontrollable events, and hide the real forces that materialize social constitution. I've chosen to portray in this slide an oil painting by the Italian painter Giuseppe Arcimboldo, 1591, consists of multiple fruit, vegetables, and flowers that come together to create a portrait of the Roman Emperor Rudolf II. Arcimboldo's choice to include these items was also an intentional reference to the Roman god Vertumnus, and this is the title of the painting, the god of the seasons and plant growth and change. And although his colleagues commented that this painting was a scherzo, which means a humorous painting, there were actually intentional political hidden meanings behind the piece, particularly regarding the choice of specific fruits, vegetables, and flowers. And this, in my view, was a good kind of representation of the shift between discourse analysis and critical discourse analysis. CDS is more interested in the ways in which language is used in text and conversation to construct and maintain social realities and power dynamics. This includes the study of how particular narratives, terms, and concepts are used to shape public opinion and societal norms. CDA examines how power relations and social inequalities are embedded and perpetuated through language to be regarded as a site of struggle over meaning and representation, where dominant ideologies are both produced and fortunately challenged. This, I think, is the real contribution of CDA, which, to be honest, was quite groundbreaking in the 1990s, and I think still a little bit groundbreaking. And the secret probably to be a good critical discourse analyst is keeping this very balance between the macro and the micro levels of analysis. At the end of the day, it was also a response to the traditional divide between linguistics and other areas of the social sciences, such as sociology, keeping a more balanced concern with language and society. And while I'm not oblivious to the fact that the poetic is always political, possibly even more so in the Caribbean, the adoption of a critical discursive approach, in my opinion, broadens the definition of Caribbean discourse to include contemporary political, media, and institutional discourse that are very much worthy of investigation as discourses in themselves, as they're highly imbricated in various dimensions of the socio-political economic processes, and of course, post and neo-colonial systems at large. As I mentioned, the notion of critique is the one that marks the very identity of CDS as a field. This juxtaposition of the adjective critical to discourse studies has customarily been intended as drawing a line between a non-critical formal linguistic and a critical form of discourse analysis that is interested in social and political issues, first of all, including racism, xenophobia, sexism. And in addition to linguistic theory, of course, in order to reach this goal, the approach draws from social theory, critical theory, in order to examine ideologies and power relations involved in discourse. Language connects with the social through the primary domain of ideology, and through being both a site of and a stake in struggles of power. In this respect, the definition of critique in CDS is a little bit challenging. There is not one critique in CDS, really. Different scholars, usually associated with core strands in CDS, have been drawing on different social theories, from Marx to Gramsci, from the critical theory of the Frankfurt School, and Bourdieu, Foucault, and other post-structuralists. As expected, this complexity is taken to the next level when we add the post-colonial Caribbean to the picture, and with it necessary references to post-colonial theories and critique. Post-colonial studies are a very broad and widely contested field in itself, polysemous for sure, variously defined, and of course deeply interrelated with a number of issues that emerge in a different contemporary post-colonial context. However, if we were to identify a very general overarching aim, it would be to account for the geopolitical, historical, human differences of post-colonial contexts, and to give them resonance from what the so-called considered up to a point margins. As a result, Western social theories and their conventional terms and categories emerging out of a particular experience of the West have been largely regarded as controversial by post-colonial scholars, especially in their application to the understanding of post-colonial modernity. So if a post-colonial CDS can really exist, these commonalities and these tensions have to be taken into account. And the way forward can only be traced by tackling 4 questions, such as, how do we interpret and perform critique? What is power and how are power relations configured? How do we define and detect ideology at the very intersection of CDS and post-colonial theory? So instead of seeing CDS as a set of tools that can be interchangeably applied to any context, the post-colonial holds just as much importance for CDS theorizing, because it has the potential to provincialize it and pushes for a higher awareness of the most contemporary debates around critical discursive theories and how the focus on conditions of geopolitical and historical difference necessarily compels revision or integrations to the framework. In 2021, I published a book, which is partly based on my PhD dissertation that I completed in 2015, and partly also including other reflection on CDS and post-coloniality that I developed in following years. I focused on the 2010 Trinidad and Tobago election campaign that, as you know, brought to victory Kamala Persad-Bissessar. For me, it was a very interesting campaign. She's a very interesting political figure. In 2022, I received quite a harsh review by a Trinidadian scholar. It was published on the New West Indian Guide. And apart from the fact that my book is regarded as absolutely unremarkable throughout the review, which is an opinion that I'm not going to contest, Dr. Ramcharitar concludes at asking why such a widely used analytic, such as CDA or DHA, had to be brought in a visitor suitcase rather than being deployed from the local academy. But is it really the case? Yes, maybe the methodology, stricter sense, obtained in a visitor suitcase. For example, the taxonomy of analysis, proper root voted discourse historical approach, nomination, predication, argumentation, and so on. Or for example, Preston Van Leeuwen's methodology for reading images and unpacking why Kamala Persad-Bissessar was almost always at the right-hand side of the image when she's portrayed as a prime minister candidate. But these are just details, I think. There's just one thing that did not come in a visitor suitcase, and here I beg to disagree with Dr. Ramcharitar. And that thing is the actual cornerstone of everything that we're trying to do here, and it's the element that you really cannot do without. And that element is critique. It would be a mistake to think that critique was not inherently autochthonous to the Caribbean. And I'm not saying this because the Caribbean can fund incredible critical theories and even huge names like Fanon or Glissant, among many others, but because the Caribbean has always been critical, has always been rethinking modernity, humanity, and critique itself. Critique has always been there in the literary, artistic, linguistic production and the related scholarship I've been trying to summarize in my short presentation. The value of a Caribbean CDS is that it allows us to ask questions that we cannot necessarily, or not always at least, ask to the novels of B.S. Natal or the poems of Derek Walcott. It is for the 2024 question. Why a Black attacker is a terrorist and a white attacker is a loner. Why migrants are talked about in the press using disease metaphors. Why do we care so much about the clothes of a woman prime minister? Why do we think it's a good idea to ask her where she left her kids? But we never ask that to a male prime minister. Why the press can title that a guy killed his girlfriend because he loved her too much. And if you think that these questions are uncomfortable, then you're on a good path. These are the questions that are really worth asking. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Esposito. That was extremely invigorating and very, very interesting indeed. So let's move along to our third and final reading. It is an excerpt from chapter 11, Digital Discourses on Gender-Based Violence in Trinidad and Tobago. Interesting thing for me. This was done by Dr. Esposito, Anisha, and Ryan as well. Our reader today is going to be Gillian Moore. Gillian just completed her studies in the Master of Arts Carnival Studies at the University of Trinidad and Tobago. Her thesis focused on the work of the Lord Kitchener, which she explored in part through intersectional feminist lenses. Let us now welcome Gillian.
Good afternoon, everybody. Congratulations to the authors and the editors on this wonderful work. Results. In order to conduct this research, we retrieved the most read and commented newspaper articles covering the 3 cases under examination, as posted on the official Facebook pages of 3 leading newspapers in Trinidad and Tobago: the Trinidad Express, Trinidad and Tobago Newsday, and Trinidad and Tobago Guardian. We focused exclusively on Facebook as the most used social media platform in Trinidad and Tobago, and consequently, an important outlet for newspapers to share their news pieces. The victims. The discursive strategies used to refer to Andrea Barrett, Ashanti Riley, and Crystal Primus Espinosa are of particular interest as they shed light not only on the effective stance of the Facebook audience, but also on the societal value systems and gender stereotypes attached to the discursive representation of women who fall victim to male violence. In order to critically interpret the results in this section, we drew on the victimological concept of ideal victim, as theorized and made popular through the work of the renowned Norwegian criminologist Niels Christie. Revolutionary in introducing value hierarchies in the designation of victimhood, Christie posited that some victims are deemed more readily deserving of complete and legitimate status than others. Although a culturally specific and therefore variable concept, generally speaking, an ideal victim should be very young or very old, and therefore particularly vulnerable, more often female than male, and preyed upon by an unknown perpetrator. Completely innocent and blameless, ideal victims are fully acknowledged as being a real victim and generate the most sympathy from society. When it comes to forms of gender-based violence, such as rape and femicide, widespread rape myths and stereotypes have depicted the real rape victim to be young, female, and attractive, and the perpetrator to be male, usually a stranger, who attacks the vulnerable woman late at night as she walks home. While decades of research have challenged these false beliefs, for example, we know now that most rapes are instances of intimate partner violence and occur at home. The real rape social stereotype persists and is perpetuated by the popular media, who tend to give higher visibility and resonance to cases of rape that are in keeping with this stereotype. In this section, we explore the extent to which Barrett, Riley, and Primus Espinosa may or may not possess some of these real victims features, allowing their discursive construction as worthy of victim status and of unquestionable sympathy. To start with, results show that the young age of Barrett and Riley is a crucial element, highlighted in several nominalization strategies employed to refer to the two victims. 1, nothing could change the fact that an innocent child is gone forever. 3, such a beautiful child. It tears my heart to imagine what this child went through. Rest in peace, pretty angel. 4, my belly hurts. My heart pains knowing they killed this innocent baby. She did nothing wrong. Gosh. References to these two victims as child or baby, often collocating with the adjective innocent, exemplify the perceived vulnerability attached to the very young age of the victim. The fact that they had their whole life ahead, that this very life was brutally taken from them, is one of the main triggers of this strong emotional response. However, using the words child and baby to refer to two women over 18 also strikes some commentators as excessive and sensationalist. Many have voiced their disappointment in response to the words of UNC MP Rudal Munilal in response to Andrea Barrett's death. It took the death of a child in this country to repair CCTV cameras. That is the tragedy we face. As reported by the Trinidad Express, she was not a child. She was a young lady, shaking my head. Devil is in the details. Simple like that, the facts turn to fiction and we get fake news. 7, which child? She was not a child. Stop the sensationalism. Come on, guys. She was a woman with a childlike appearance. Counter-arguments, in turn, draw on the emotional response and sympathy with the family of the victims and empathy with the family of the victims, stating that she was somebody's daughter or a child of God, as well as one a wee daughter, that is a child of Trinidad and Tobago. In example 10, the reference to the victim being bright and educated brings in another crucial element of the discursive representation of the ideal victim, namely the added value they were bringing to society and the proportionate collective loss experienced as a nation. 9, isn't she a child of God, a child to her parents and family? 10. They're wicked. They kill one of we bright, educated daughter, Andrea, and we're not taking that. It is often difficult, if not impossible, for women victims of gender-based violence to attain the complete and legitimate status of being a real victim, worthy of compassion and support. The ideal victim stereotype is influenced by a range of aspects, including individual characteristics and lifestyle of the victim-offender relationship, and the level of physical violence and injuries. For example, the 36-year-old married mother of two, Crystal Primus Espinosa, doesn't easily fit into that process of infantilization that seems to characterize the discursive representation of Barrett and Riley. Moreover, with the circumstances of her death being less clear, comments also highlight that she left her home without informing her husband, or that the body was found in underwear, also with explicit references to a potential marital infidelity. Living in Mayaro, for some odd reason, you leave your sleeping husband and went to Toko. 12. But she didn't have on any clothes when they found her. Where and how did it all come off? Broader societal values factor into the discourses of ideal victims, and traditional conservative gender roles represent the point of reference to assess potential derogations of gender-based violence victims and acceptance of rape myths. Clothes, in particular, have always been associated with attempts to blame rape victims. A woman is understood as bearing at least partial responsibility if her clothes are regarded as too sexy or provocative. Examples of this are comments targeting Ashanti Riley, who's blamed for the clothing she's wearing in a picture shared by newspapers. That's why women need to stop dressing sinfully in skin-hugging clothes and being alone with men they are not related to or married to. She was not innocent. She was wearing skin-hugging pants publicly. That is a serious sin. As Daly summarized, a victim status is not fixed, but socially constructed, mobilized, and malleable. We've seen how the most important reasons for perceiving a victim as legitimate and blameless are the specific identity features of the victim, as well as the relation between victim and offender. Young age and high level of education may have consecrated Andrea Barrett, while Ashanti Riley's supposedly skin-hugging pants and Crystal Primus Espinosa's suspected marital infidelity have offered ample room for doubt and victim blaming. Such stereotypical topoi impact on the social perception and media framing of these cases. In this respect, there may even be a correlation between the status of ideal victim and the amount of media coverage dedicated to different victims. Higher for Barrett, in the middle for Riley, lowest for Primus Espinosa. As we'll see in the next section, the more innocent the victim is considered and the more suffering she's thought to have endured, the more negative and punitive the reaction to her offender will be.
Thank you very much, Julian. We would now like to acknowledge and welcome to the podium Dr. Barbara Constance, the assistant professor and program leader, my boss, at the Center for Education Programs at the University of Trinidad and Tobago.
Thank you, Dr. Govaya. And I just want to say how excited I feel because I'm just feeling as though I'm home. I'm seeing, persons from all stages of my life, right? And this is just telling us of the important job everyone here, at least who was connected to my education and your education, how well they participated. And just a few weeks ago, being in China, I remembered one of the professors saying to us that in as much as China is topping the world in PISA, that's the standard they use for academics, he mentioned that, they have one Nobel Prize and Japan has 28. And then he said, after regaling us at all the great things they have done academically, he said, after days of saying we are the best in the world, they came to tell us, yes, but that is dead education. And what we are seeing here is education is more than just any books in the classroom. Education is life. I just want to pause a bit as we talk about life to acknowledge Dr. Selva Ramkisoon. We thank you for what you did here today. I just acknowledge that. And I just want to just also, and I know she'll agree with me, we just want to acknowledge all these stalwarts in our life. I mean, they're all in just in one room here today. So Professor Imbe, thank you for being here today. And I am seeing in front of me Dr. and I'll say Barbara. She's also Barbara. I am also Barbara. She's first. Professor Barbara Lala. And I'm just, I'm just acknowledging, I'm seeing Professor Youssef. All of these persons who taught us along the way, my PhD supervisor right in front here, Dr. Bradshaw. I can't call everyone's name. And there are some who are younger, but they also taught me. Right. So don't feel, a how, I'll say use our term, Dr. Sanderson Cole. She actually taught me at UWE, would you believe it? And then of course I have persons who just know me since I was a child, like Dr. Tyson Noel. Yes. And one thing he said also, he said that real education, we learn it from nature and we learn it from society. So we learn from one another. Yes, we have gone through the formal path, but then there's the informal part. I can talk about all the great things I learned from my grandmother who went to school until standard 2. And I still repeat them today, right? So what we are doing here, we need to infuse into our society, into our classrooms. And just some years ago, working with Cape CXC, one of the things we noticed that fewer and fewer people are doing literature in the schools. And that is so painful. We need to have literature out there because, sometimes you could stop a murder because someone is better able to critically analyze a situation and to understand. And I'm quoting this from my fourth form literature teacher, the otherness of the other, right? So it goes way back. When I did anything to do with critical discourse analysis, it would have been at UE some years ago, put it aside, went on to phenomenology, and then just recently came back to it. Dr. Bradshaw knows, started back looking into it. So we plant that seed. We may not even see it for a while, but it is there, and that great work is happening, even though it seems as though the seed has disappeared. And one day we'll see that little baby plant, and then probably a few years later down, a big tree. I just thought of it and I got a bit emotional. My birthplace, Venezuela. Look at what's happening in Venezuela. I literally was supposed to go to Venezuela just this month. I said, I'll see what's happening in elections first before I can go and see family members. Look what's happening. So talking about critical discourse analysis is not just for a book and to publish articles. This is about the future of our nation. This is about how we get along with persons who are different in many different ways. I know Ms. Saniford didn't know what I saw in the Emancipation March yesterday. And I was there and I was looking at all the different persons. I met some persons I was able to greet and whatnot. This is a diverse nation, right? And it's not enough for us to think that in our little corner, once I am educated and once I am fine, nothing is going to happen to me. No, if we do not get those who are dispossessed also to think and to analyze, and if we do not have empathy, we will also be targeted. my grandmother, and we're talking about my grandmother and her many lessons, would tell us about the boy who bit off his grandmother's ear, his mother's ear. You know that story? Yes. I don't think people tell it anymore. She said, I'm telling you, because she would tell us, children must be seen, and we would say, and not heard. Manners, and we would repeat, maketh man. We had to finish the sentence. And she said, you know, what happens when you don't guide the young ones? Then one day they might end up in jail and they'll bite off your ear. We like children like, what? But we understand what that, we might think it's a Nancy story. I don't know if it ever really happened, but we understand the value of these Nancy stories. So while we are here today, we really appreciate what came out of all of this work. And we really want to deeply pay our respects to this book launching. So we want to say thank you again. Thank you for coming. And again, welcome to UTT. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, Dr. Constance. At this point, we are going to have a look at an interview with the editors done by Dr. Karen Sanderson Cole. She's a lecturer in the Department of Modern Languages and Linguistics at the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine, Trinidad and Tobago. Her research emphases include the Caribbean political autobiography, improving the postgraduate university experience, as well as teaching and learning at the tertiary level. We will now take a look at this pre-recorded interview.
Good morning. I am here with Nisha and Ryan, the editors of the latest book, the reason we are all here today. Yay! And I just wanted to ask them a couple of questions that can help us more or less understand and be an inspiration, because I'm big on that, and an inspiration for others who may be thinking about going along the same journey. So welcome, Nisha. Welcome, Ryan.
Hi.
Glad to see you.
Thank you, thank you.
So one of the first things that has been a kind of burning question for me, and I want to direct this to Ryan and Nisha, you of course can jump in. Why this collection? Why now? And when I say now, I don't mean now 2024. This would have been happening during COVID. So why at that particular time? What were the things that you were thinking and motivated you to start this process?
I think it's a very good question. This was really at the height of COVID. You know, we were filled with a lot of uncertainties about what it would mean. And I was stuck in Trinidad. I live and work in Germany. I was stuck in Trinidad for the pandemic for most of it. And it really forced a kind of inward lookingness at the time. You know, here we all were stuck at home, not really sure about where things were going to go. And I'd had an idea kicking around in my head. A lot of my work has been on what makes Caribbean English unique in certain ways, or what might be unique about our languages. And I started to think about, well, what is it that we could lose here if this were to go very badly? And I started to really think about and discuss with Nisha these ideas about, well, how do we use language in particular contexts that might be unique or different? And how can we celebrate that? And how can we begin to have lots of people who work on that from the Caribbean, also outside of the Caribbean, but a lot of them from inside the Caribbean? How do we talk about us in our languages. English is our language just as much as French is our language, Dutch is our language. It belongs to us just as much as anyone else. And how might we use these in ways to talk about us? And really, it was those kinds of strands of thinking that all kind of coalesced into us deciding to have this conference where people could talk about their academic work and how they might analyze our different writings and literatures and all kinds of things from our perspectives. But alongside that, one of the things that and I remember this was really Nisha's push and such a great idea, was to have practitioners of these kinds of texts come and talk to us about their choices, right? Really, so it came out of a time of, I would say, bleakness, but it led to great things about, well, what could we stand to lose here? And we came out and really talked about what it is we do, what it is we as Caribbean people do that makes us unique.
I like that idea of something positive coming out of what was a worldwide period of great uncertainty. And I guess it's something that comes from literature as well, this whole notion of creativity being born in the midst of darkness and depression. I'm not going to take offense at the fact that you said that you were stuck in Trinidad.
Only in a literal sense. Only in a literal sense. Only in a literal sense. Believe me, it would have been so much harder to not have been in Trinidad with my people, with my family at such a time. I am very grateful. There's very little to be grateful for about that time, but that was one of the things that I'm very grateful for, that I got to spend that time with my family, and I live not too far away from Nisha. I was able to sometimes see her from my house, waving to her and things like that. Yeah.
Nice save, Ryan. Nice save. Nisha.
Yes.
How did you get on board?
Yes. Well, as Ryan said, he started talking to me about these ideas. And I don't know if Ryan remembered, but when he said, Nisha, do you think the UTT would be interested in doing an online conference? And I said, well, I'm sure the UTT will, but also I can't imagine planning a conference with anybody else at this point except you. Ryan was the perfect person to plan this online conference with. And the minute I spoke with the administrators at the UTT, they were, very supportive. They kind of gave us a lot of leeway, because this was going to be online in a way that, perhaps may not have happened if it were face to face. So, we didn't have a lot of red tape to work through. And incredibly, we got people from around the world in critical discourse analysis, stylistics, people we had read about, quoted in our PhDs, some real, gurus in these fields. And the practitioners too from the region who came, thespians, filmmakers, writers. We had such a rich conference, a rich cast of conference presenters that left us feeling, on a high after, and people were telling us thereafter how much, the conference meant to them. So the book was a natural progression. But as soon as we wrote to the some of the presenters, they all immediately said yes. Again, because it was COVID, we have to acknowledge it was a little difficult. Some people could not commit in the end. People had real losses as well. And, we acknowledge all of that. So out of all of that upheaval came this really brilliant edited collection.
Nisha, let me ask you another question since we're focused here. I noticed that this whole issue of collaboration, this whole collaboration thing is something that you seem to be at the forefront of. I know this is not the only collaboration that you've done, but you seem to be very focused and driven, to be very inclusive in your academic pursuits. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, you and I have worked on a cross-university project, Karen. Ryan is in Germany, but we belong to Ling Lime, where we meet with colleagues from around the world, who are interested in Caribbean linguistics. We meet every so often. We get so much more done when we work together. People say healthy competition is good. Maybe that's true. I've just always found that collaboration, especially in a small space like ours, is what really gets us ahead. Sharing ideas, having safe spaces to explore ideas, which is what I think Ran and I have gotten from this online collaboration that we have. That is so important, not just in moving scholarship ahead, but also in serving the communities where we live. That at the end of the day, that's what it is about. What all of this work that we do in linguistics, we do in literatures and English, we do in the social sciences, it is really to benefit our communities. And I think we've also had examples from our professors, right? Like Professor Yusuf, Professor Lala, who introduced us to stylistics and critical discourse studies. Their fields were cross-disciplinary. And the three of us have kind of grown up, cut our teeth in cross-disciplinary work. So I think the collaboration is on the level of the disciplines, but also in terms of the universities that we serve and then the communities in which we live.
Okay. Ryan, I'm coming back to you. You mentioned that you're in Germany, and you mentioned the time that you spent here during COVID. And I want to know the perspective that you are coming from in terms of collaboration, because very often people leave, and when they leave, they kind of throw the proverbial big stone behind their back. I mean, you're in the first world now. I'm sure that there are lots of opportunities to do things that are different and maybe even more exciting than you would have opportunity to do here. Why the look back? What is motivating the look back?
Well, I'll start by saying there's nothing more exciting than Trinidad.
Okay, good. You're moving.
I don't want to be caught out by you again.
And Tobago.
And Tobago. Yeah, oh, yeah, I've been caught out now again. No, I don't really see it that way. Like I don't think. I mean, I grew up at a time in Trinidad where I was very lucky for my university to be paid for by the state. I owe everything in my career to my country and to the University of the West Indies, and now also to UTT for helping forward with this as well. I feel debt is such a dark word. I feel a responsibility, which is also a little bit harsh. I feel great commitment to where I am from, because there's no going back, there's no going forward. I still live very much as a Caribbean person, as a Trinidadian man, in whatever space I'm in. It's hard not to, for a host of reasons here in Germany, to not stand out. In that way, like I do not see myself as a person who just lives in Germany now, and that is it. For everything that I think about, I think about space in terms of Trinidad. How long will it take me to get to a certain place? The distance between Port of Spain and Chaguanas is often a way that I think about space, how I think about time. Like I tell people, okay, I'll meet you at this time, and suddenly, even after all these years, realize, I meant Trinidadian time, because I think in terms of Trinidad is still my center, and I see no contradiction to that. I am who I am, and I'm very happy to be here. I'm very happy to be where I'm from. I don't see any contradiction in those things.
Very good. Very good answer, man. Very good answer. So I'm asking both of you, either of you, both of you can answer this. What are the next directions? What's the future? Where do you think this work can go? What do you think it has opened the gateway to? What are the areas in which you'd like to see it advance?
I would want to answer that question going back a little bit. When Ryan came to me with this idea, I immediately took to it because I distinctly remember when I was doing my PhD, because we had been introduced to critical discourse studies as undergraduates, I wanted to use that as one of the lenses through which I would look at education policy. And while I could find a lot of information about how this same, I guess, methodology and frame was being used in Australia and in Europe and in Latin America, perhaps, I could find nothing for the Caribbean. And this was, something that I really struggled with while I was doing postgraduate work. I don't know how it was for you, Ran, when you were looking at stylistics, but I, do remember thinking it's CDS is such an important way or lenses to view the world, and especially in post-colonial states like ours, that it would give such, rich analysis if we had more support in how to do CDS in the Caribbean. So I think this book is one way that it's the first of its kind, I have to say. So it's the starting point of getting more scholarship in this way. Now, I have to say, in the last couple of years, I have seen articles, chapters in books, about critical discourse analysis in the Caribbean. But as an edited collection, I think it's a really good starting point. And this, I hope, will open the floodgates for more people to be encouraged to write about critical discourse studies in the Caribbean.
Yeah, I agree very much with all of those sentiments. I also feel like, well, on one hand, the book is an extension of the conference that we had in the middle of COVID. And for that reason, I will single out the conference for one important thing. As an international digital conference at that time, it allowed people who might not have been able to travel to different spaces at that time to attend a conference that was of a relatively high degree. And I think that coming out of COVID, that example is still relevant. We still live in a world of great inequalities in terms of who can access the funding to go to conferences. And a conference that can allow people from anywhere in the world to discuss things about the Caribbean, that I think is a great example. I am really, really grateful for the UTT and for Nisha and for all of our presenters who really came out without coming out, and I hope that if we ever do something like this again, that is something that Nisha and I do plan eventually to probably have another conference like this. It will be digital regardless of the world circumstances and perhaps in a much better time, because we want to make it freely available to anyone to come to the conference, but also freely available to anyone working in these types to be able to discuss them. On another level, in terms of what the book can offer now, I've been in touch with lots of graduate students in UE, one or two in UTT now, who are interested in doing some of the kinds of work that Nisha and I and others have done in the book. One of the important sections that you would have heard from is on gender-based violence. Nisha and I and Eleonora Esposito wrote a chapter on gender-based violence, and some work is being done on our media representations of gender-based violence by postgraduate students now, and they are drawing from this chapter that we have in the book, and that is not anything that I would have imagined when we first started this kind of thing, but I am so grateful that we have done this work that can impact really, and at least in that one way, but many others, the ways in which we view each other, policy decisions, and things that are really, really real and vital to our existence.
That's great. So I want to end by thanking Ryan and Nisha for this opportunity to get to talk to you and to ask you a little more about the whole process. And I also want to, I think, join the rest of the community in encouraging you, applauding your effort, and supporting you in any way that we can. You are two bright voices coming out of the Caribbean. Right, Ryan?
Yes, always.
And we look forward to many more and greater things from you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you very
much,
much,
Karen.
Karen. Thank you
Yeah,
so
thank
much
you
for
very
agreeing
much.
to do this and with your usual high level of excellence.
And for
Thank you.
contributing to the edited collection
Oh,
as
yes.
well. Yeah.
Yes, I should say this too.
Yeah. Thanks so much.
Thank you so,
Okay,
so much.
bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Ciao.
Okay, at this juncture, we want to present copies of Caribbean Discourses to the Alma Jordan Library at UWI, Nallis Heritage Library Division, and our UTT Library. And I would like to ask Dr. Nisha Salvan Ramkisoon herself to make the presentations. First to Ms. Georgia Alexander, Faculty Liaison and representing the Alma Jordan Library. Then from Nallis, we'd like to welcome Mr. Curtis Ramuta from the Heritage Library Division. And finally, here at UTT, Ms. Suzanne Sandiford. Thank you so much. Don't go too far, Nisha. We now have our vote of thanks. Dr. Nisha Selvan Ramkisoon is an assistant professor and general administrator at the Center for Education Programs, University of Trinidad and Tobago, where she teaches courses in linguistics, literature, and education. She holds a PhD in linguistics, for which she engaged in cross-disciplinary research, which allowed her to explore various aspects of qualitative and critical discourse methodologies in relation to language and education. She has published in the areas of language arts curriculum development, second dialect pedagogy, critical discourse studies, including post-colonial readings of literary texts and indigenous methodologies, and trans-languaging pedagogy for migrant children. Her current research involves an analysis of language use and thematic concerns in the evolution of soca music. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Nisha Salvan Ramkisoon.
All protocols observed, I have the happy task of saying thanks on behalf of Ryan and myself. And in usual style, Ryan has left me here at the podium. I'd first like to say thank you to the UTT management. Prof, thanks for being here. But also, thank you to UTT for giving us the green light for the Stylistics conference, which was held in the height of COVID, as you've heard, and then for supporting us throughout for this book launch. And I really would like to say thank you to the management. Corpcom is in charge of these kinds of activities, and we were very fortunate to have Ricardo Williams as our liaison for the conference, and then they recycled him for us for this book launch. So we were able to have, really congenial relationship. He gave us all the support we needed. Thank you so much, Ricardo. TLIS, the part of the UTT that runs the IT, the technical aspect, Lyle Waldron and Nisha Suku, who has not left my side. Nisha was here yesterday on the public holiday, just making sure that things would run well. And still uninvited, Murphy showed up. But she stuck with me, and I'm really so grateful that we were able to sort out everything. Thank you so much. To my CEP colleagues, you were here online for the conference. Many of our colleagues at the Center for Education Programs, were chairs and also presenters at the conference. You're here at the book launch. You have supported me as faculty, as administrator. I'm always grateful for your support. Thank you so much, CP. Dr. Barbara Constance, who is not just my program leader, but we've been friends for almost 2 decades. Thank you so much for being here. Dr. Bradshaw was a chair for the conference. She was a reviewer for a chapter in the book, and then she was the general book reviewer. Thank you so much, Dr. Bradshaw. You never let us down. You always say yes. I suspect at the back of my mind that the day has more than 24 hours for her, but you know, she's not telling us the secret. Our administrative staff at the Center for Education Programs. I'm at the Point Lisas campus, and anybody who knows me know that I say I have the best support team. I won the lottery with the support team. They were the first ones there in the back there. And, you know, Niran, Cleo, Kumari, I really appreciate you being here and all the work that you've done. But I really would like to acknowledge, she may have left, Miss Nalini Durgadeen. Yeah, she was the admin that worked with me for this book launch, did a lot of the heavy lifting. The books that you see here were lost twice in transit before they came to Trinidad. She was making calls, you know, all over. I don't understand why either. The Bermuda Triangle effect, I don't know. And everything that coalesced to come to this moment, Nalini has been involved in, and I really appreciate her and everyone's support. Dr. Eleanor Esposito, our featured speaker. She was one of our featured speakers for the conference. And when we spoke to her about the possibility of the book, she sent us everything that she had written on critical discourse analysis, things that were not even published as yet. And she was very gracious to work with us on that chapter on media representation of violence, given her role in the European Union on gender discourse studies. And we are very grateful for her for doing the feature address today. Our 3 readers, I mean, come on, Andeline, Shamari, and Jillian, they brought this book alive for us. I was just having a good time looking at how Shamari could not contain himself when he was reading. And, you know, I think each of these readers exemplified what I hope the book would do for each of us, because they read from the parts that connected with them. You know, Shamar is the politician. He had to read about how very precarious this politics thing is. You know, Jillian looks at the world through feminist lenses, and you know, this was a really good chapter for her to engage in. And Andeline is in linguistics and literatures in English. So I think they showed us what the possibilities of being an owner of this book could have, right? Our colleagues at the UE, we didn't get here, Anne and I did not get here without you, and you're still here with us. Geraldine Skeet, a contributor to the collection, came to the conference with us for the 2 days. We were just in a room together because of COVID. We couldn't assemble. She stayed with us for the 2 days. Karen Sanderson Cole, as you saw, you know, agreed to do the interview with us, and she did not let us off easy, and that's why we asked her. Our professors, Professor Lala, Professor Yusuf, we're so happy that you're here. Professor Yusuf got lost a few times, but we're really happy that she was able to eventually find her way. Dr. Steele did not. Professor Steele was here on time. He found his way. So we're very happy to have you here too. Our eloquent master of ceremonies, right? Dr. Reuven Govaya. Dr. Reuven Govaya is known to us as Dirk. I didn't even know that was his name until a few years ago, and that was really, again, as soon as we asked, he said, yes, I would certainly do this for you all. Our panelist, the young man, Kaelan Alexis, thank you for starting with us, and he's going to be continuing with us at the reception downstairs. And of course, you know, our friends and our family. We
couldn't get here without you all. Ryan and my parents are here in the audience. My kids are here. My husband is joined virtually. He can't sit for 2 hours. Our siblings, our relatives, our friends from CXC, all our friends and family are supporting us. Karen called us two bright voices. Did you hear that in the interview? Yeah. But we couldn't become these voices without the support networks that we have. And I mean, I don't even want to watch one of my friends who's here and probably not understanding a thing that's going on, but she's here to support us. And, you know, these are the kinds of people that have made our lives. And we appreciate everything that you've done to bring us to this moment. Ryan and I want to especially thank you, the audience, the physical audience, the virtual audience. We know coming out on a Friday in the traffic zone at midday is not an easy thing to do. The virtual audience that's joining us, whether they're at work or, you know, out of the country, a lot of our colleagues out of the country. We take your attendance virtually and physically as tangible evidence of your love and support, and for that we thank you.
What a wonderful vote of thanks. Thank you so much, Nisha. So we have come to the end of this book launch. We thank you so much. Just a couple of interesting notes. One, the books are being sold today. Yes, they are being sold. They're not free. At a very reduced cost of 565 TT dollars. And that's, you don't even want to know what the regular price is. So take my stupid advice and get it now while you can. There'll be links. We will accept links and or cash downstairs. The second note is that you are welcome to join for a very, very informal reception downstairs where you will be entertained by the lovely mellow sounds of Keelan, who, let's hope if the music is good enough, it will entice you to purchase your copy. I have my copy already, which is signed by Nisha, so she's here to sign it if you want as well. So thank you so much for today. Despite the little hiccups that we had, we appreciate your patience and we wish you a wonderful day. Thank you very, very much. The links will actually be here. The links machine, if you want to make any purchases, will be set up here. All right. Thank you.